mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic.
Hey everybody, welcome back to One Mic, where I watch shit so you don't have to. And today I'm here to talk about episode 7 of FX and Hulu's The Patient, entitled Kaddish. Now, I know you guys know why the episode is titled Kaddish. It's very easy to suss out in this episode. The Kaddish is a pretty huge focus of this episode. So I want to start by reading this excerpt from Wikipedia about the Kaddish, because I think it's important to read this and note how it ties into the events of this episode. So it's about a paragraph. So it's going to be longer than, one or two sentences, but I think it's important. So I'm going to read this directly. Kaddish is a hymn praising God that is recited during Jewish prayer services. The term Kaddish is often used to refer specifically to the mourner's Kaddish. Side note, in this episode, once Sam prints it out and hands it to Alan, you can see the words "the mourner's Kaddish" printed out on the top of it. So that is exactly what Alan is reading. So, like I said, used to refer specifically to the mourner's Kaddish, which is chanted as part of the mourning rituals. Mourning with a U, not mourning as in the opposite of nighttime. Mourning as in mourning a deceased loved one or something like that. So chanted as part of the mourning rituals in Judaism in all prayer services, as well as at funerals and memorials, for 11 Hebrew months after the death of a parent, and in some communities for 30 days after the death of a spouse, sibling, or child. When mention is made of saying Kaddish, this often refers to the rituals of mourning. Mourners recite Kaddish to show that despite the loss, they still praise God. I think that's important because we see the Kaddish mentioned several times in this episode and recited. And I think at the beginning of the episode, we see him wanting to say the prayer for his wife. Well, I don't think that he says it directly, that he wants to say the prayer for his wife that passed. And this description tells us that in some communities, they do that for 30 days after the death of a spouse, sibling, or child. I can't recall if they've mentioned specifically how long it's been since Beth has passed. But it could be, I feel like it's been more than 30 days, but it also could be a situation where it would have been within 30 days had he not been kidnapped by Sam. He could have been doing this for 30 days. But I think at the beginning, it starts off as him wanting to say the prayer for his wife. But by the end of the episode, when it's given to him by Sam in a printout and he's saying it, he's standing up, he's facing that sliding door that enters into the basement where he stays at. I think by that point, he's saying it for himself. Like, it feels like he's kind of relegated himself to, I ain't gonna make it and I'm not gonna be around much longer. Maybe a day or two. He was already losing faith in his ability to make it out of there. And I think Sam coming back and saying, I didn't put the body where it could be found. I put it where it would never be found. So now his hopes around that note being discovered are now dashed. And we see how much that meant to him because he's constantly envisioning throughout this episode the police coming through that sliding basement door and saving him because they found the note. So I think that, it's interesting to see how the Kaddish or the saying of it, I think, shifts in meaning and importance from the beginning of the episode to the end. So I want to talk a little bit more about, I think, well, not necessarily about the Kaddish, but about this Orthodox Judaism. And I've talked about it multiple times throughout these videos, but I want to talk about it because they get into it a little bit more in this episode in a way that I think is important. Because I think the primary focus, the A-plot here, is on Beth, Ezra, and Alan's relationship and how Ezra's shift to Orthodox Judaism really impacted Beth and Alan and their daughter. I think her name was Shoshana, I believe. So we see a flashback scene where Ezra is looking very young and he's presumably, because we don't hear him say it, telling his parents about his decision to, I guess, pursue Orthodox Judaism. And Beth merely just calls it like a cult and leaves. And I wonder, this show has cast Beth in a very victim-like light. Who was Beth's main champion after episode 1 or 2 where she got shut down for trying to sing at the wedding? It was this guy right here. So Beth has been set up as a sympathetic character, but you have to wonder when your kid comes to you with this, I don't want to say confession because it makes it sound like he did something, but it's this admission, this desire, like, this is what I want to do. And that's the kind of response you give. it feels like this relationship not got off to a bad start, but we'll call it a bad start as in start of it post-Orthodox decision. It got off to a bad start because of how Beth handled the situation. And you have to wonder how would things have played out differently if Beth had not even necessarily been more open to it, but just been more willing to have a discussion and be like, why do you feel like you need to pursue this direction? What about this way? What's wrong with this? Have you, just having a discussion instead of saying, oh, that's some cult shit and walking off. So it's like, now you kind of wonder what part did Beth play in their estrangement here. And I think that's an interesting conversation to have. And I think that's also interesting coming from me of all people to sit here as much as I've railed against what this Orthodox Judaism seems to represent. For me, it's kind of wild to say it, but I do believe this is your kid coming to you with a big decision saying, that's some cult shit and dipping off is not how you want to approach it, even if that's how you feel. Like if my son came to me saying, I've taken up some religion that you think is dumb as fuck, I'm going to still tell him that I think it's dumb as fuck, but not like that. I'm going to be like, that's fucking stupid and walk off. We're going to have a conversation where my feelings on it are going to come to light, and I'm going to attempt to have a back and forth with him to get an understanding of where he's coming from and see if it's something I can get behind, if it's something I want to push back on, whatever the case may be. But I'm not going to be dismissive like that. And I think it's an interesting conversation to have about, how much of a role did Beth play in this estrangement by not giving him a shot at having a conversation at least. And I think the best scene of this whole season, in my opinion, is when Alan's telling Charlie about how Ezra handled Beth's death. He talks about how Ezra treats his in-laws like, a great way, like his own parents, and like they get all this time and everything seems to be hunky-dory. And then when he and Beth would ever show up, they were treated like second-class citizens. And then he says that he felt like Beth was treated as if she's not Jewish enough. And he's like, that's wild. Someone who's dedicated their whole life to Judaism being treated like they're not Jewish enough, like they're not good enough for this religion. And then he says that when when Beth was on her deathbed, she just wanted to have her family around. And he says that Ezra gave this holier than thou speech at his wife's deathbed about how her life decisions were like illegal and all this kind of shit. And there's a lot of great lines in this scene. And I combined two lines here that I wanted to specifically cite. And it's not read like this, but I combined them because it's the overall thought that I want to talk about here. So these are two separate quotes, but I've combined them into one. He said this is what Alan says, referring to Ezra. His whole life was a rebellion against his mother. At a certain point, you have to come back around. You have to grow up. Beth wanted to die with her family around her, and he had to throw a tantrum. And that, I think, gets to the heart of now we can see where Alan's coming from as well, and why, not just why he holds so much resentment toward Ezra, but just the level of resentment. A couple of minutes ago, I sat here and I said that Beth should have given Ezra a little bit more conversation when he brought this decision to her. And now I'm going to sit here and again rail on how fucking dumb this religion is. Like, again, I wonder what goes on in people's minds. Like, I said this in the episode, with the wedding. Why would you want to be involved in a religion or support a deity that is going to have a stupid fucking rule like women can't sing at ceremonies, that's going to have you putting your own mother in a place where she's embarrassed when she's trying to do something nice for you? She's got people walking out in the middle of it, and she's being put in a very awkward situation when she just wants to do something nice for her son at his wedding. And whatever stupid fucking religion thing that you believe in is going to allow you to mistreat a parent, someone who's there for you, who's physically here on earth, who has taken care of you and raised you, and you're going to treat that person like shit because of some make-believe bullshit that you read in a book that's fucking dumb and that tells you that it's okay to treat someone who's really been there for you and who's been supportive of you, to treat them like shit. This book is going to tell you that that's okay, or at least make you believe it's okay, and you're going to buy it. Like, that's bad enough, right? But then now we have this situation where now you would think that your parent dying would be the hump that you need to get over. Like, once you reach that point, you're going to be like, okay, maybe I can put this dumb fucking religion I believe in to the side and be here in my parents' final hours. But instead, Ezra decides to be a piece of shit and go on this give this holier than thou speech about how her life was wrong, and leave out and take a moment that it's only going to happen once in life. And some people don't get this opportunity to share their final moments with their parents. And he made it about himself. And like, that is where I am fully on board with Alan in his dismissal of Ezra. And then, like, he said, like, at some point you have to come back around, you have to grow up. And Alan is doing that. He's trying to reach out to Ezra. He's trying to make amends. He's trying to maintain some sort of relationship with his son post his mother's death, and his son is still being a bitch. So, like, I really cannot get, like, Ezra is a fucking horrible person. Point blank, period. Not, oh, this is a mean thing you did. You are a bad person, and your religion has made you that way. So, like, Ezra needs to take a long look in the mirror and think, like, why am I such a cunt? And he will come to the conclusion that it's his stupid fucking religion that made him treat his mother like shit, both when he found out that she was, when he told her what his decision was, throughout the final moments of her life dealing with cancer, and up to the moment when she is on her deathbed. He was such a childish piece of shit that he let his mother die while he stood on while he himself chose to die on the hill of his dumb fucking religion being something that's of value, where even though it would allow you to treat a parent like that. So, like, all that to say, I keep getting Ezra and Alan mixed up for some reason. Alan's harsh feelings about Ezra in this scene, I totally get it. Of course, right? How could you not get that? And hearing him work through that, I think is going to be an important factor in how this show concludes. I believe it's 10 episodes, which means we have 3 left. He's got 3 episodes, I think, to come to grips with how Ezra and this Orthodox Judaism has impacted his life and how he feels right now in his relationship with Ezra. But I think more importantly, the show needs to tie this in. Like, right now, these are still 2 very separate things. We have Alan dealing with his shit, and then we have Alan dealing with Sam's shit. And those 2 things, I'm wondering how these 2 things are going to connect. Like, when is Alan's relationship with Ezra and what has happened because of that religion, how is that going to tie in or have some sort of impact on how he deals with Sam? That's what I'm kind of waiting for. But as of right now, I think the Ezra Allen stuff just got a lot more interesting with that great scene with David Alan Grier, who I think has played this Charlie character very well, by the way. So one more quick thing before I wrap up, because there is a B plot here. And the B plot, I think, ties into the idea that Sam is starting to become disillusioned with Alan and is like, okay, it might be time for me to move on from this guy. And what's interesting is that he seems to come to this conclusion simply after saying, hey, I want to talk to you. And Alan's like, yo, I had a long day. I'm trying to go to sleep. And just what to Alan probably felt like an inconsequential turn down, but also was probably fueled by his feelings of, like, giving up. Like, I don't feel like I'm not going to live anyway, so fuck it. That, unbeknownst to Alan, could be the one little meaningless sentence that made the difference between whether or not he lives or dies. Because if Sam gets a new therapist, guess who he don't need anymore? So, like I said, this B plot seems to be Sam kind of shopping for a new therapist and questioning people on if they knew he was batshit crazy the whole time. So he goes to a school and meets with what I can only assume is maybe an old school counselor, and tells this story about a teacher throwing a desk and almost hitting a kid. And then he talks to this counselor guy and comes back and apologizes, doesn't return for the next year. And he asks the counselor, like, hey, did you get this guy fired? And he's like, yeah. And so he asked this guy, he's like, hey, would you be interested in being my therapist? And he's like, I typically only do this with active students, never with a previous student. But he gives Sam his number and says, he'll think about it and for Sam to call him. And also, we see Sam talk to his ex again. And he asked the ex, hey, did you see any signs that I was batshit crazy? And the ex is like, we were married and got divorced. Of course I saw issues with you, but at the end of the day, I think you're a good guy. So now he got 2 people telling him that they never got the idea that he would be the person who he became. And I think there's some solace that Sam finds in that, in knowing that he hasn't always been this way, or at least he hasn't always been perceived as someone who could be that way. And I think that gives him some hope for change. And I think that's what fuels him to buy the printer and show some empathy for Alan. In addition to that kind of being like an empathetic act, you have a moment where Sam seems to briefly consider killing himself, right? He's looking at this water, and I guess he decides against it, and he goes to buy this printer to print out the Kaddish for Alan. And like I said, that felt very empathetic to me, which to me indicates that Alan's therapy is working to some degree, right? So I think when you combine getting two, I think, words of affirmation, I guess, from, not 2 words, 2 instances of words of affirmation from his ex and from this previous school counselor, and you couple that with him deciding against killing himself and deciding to get Alan a printer so that he can, recite this prayer that's important to him, I think all of that does kind of start to show that Sam is turning a corner, even though he's shopping for a new therapist. So it's like you kind of got to figure out, like, where's the balance here? What's going to happen? Is he going to lean toward new therapist and I don't need Alan anymore? Or is Alan starting to get through to him and he's kind of like, yeah, maybe I can work through this after all. So real quick before I wrap up, I did just want to kind of point out that I thought it was interesting that this show took, when Alan was envisioning the police coming in and saving him, how graphic the murder of Sam was, or the stabbing of Sam by Alan, or the stabbing of Alan by Sam. All very graphic scenes. And I'm just curious what the reasoning was for that. Like, and it's not that I have a problem with it at all, but I don't know. I just thought that was an interesting decision to take a show that's very cerebral and just interject like almost cartoonish levels of violence in there. Like the way, like when Alan Sam, the way the blood spurts out like that. Like I said, it almost felt like a graphic novel or some shit. But that's all I got. Again, I thought this episode was pretty solid. I really, really liked Alan's speech at the end about Ezra and how Ezra behaved when Beth was on her deathbed. I thought there was some big breakthroughs, I think, for both Alan and Sam separate from each other in this episode, which I think is interesting. They didn't have these breakthroughs together as one. They had them separately. But like I said, a really solid episode. 3 more left, and I will see you guys next Tuesday for episode 8. Peace.